Great, thank you very much. I will try to make sure I stay close to the line of sight microphone system here. But great to have all these first-time folks visiting. So what I'm going to ask you is, how many of you have tried a pawpaw before? So, okay, quite a few first-time visitors too. But great, glad to have you here today. We're going to cover a lot of things about pawpaw. And for those of you who don't know about pawpaw, it is a similar triloba. It's actually in the same tropical family. It's in the tropical family of Annonaceae. So if you've ever had a cherimoya or a soursop, it's kind of got that flavor, right? A little bit of that flavor, kind of that banana, mango, pineapple flavor. And that's a lot of times the we describe it. So a lot of times, you know, we're saying it's the Kentucky banana, or the Hoosier banana, or the Ohio banana, right? Because it kind of has that cluster, as you see behind me. And sometimes there's a lot of them in a cluster. Actually, it's probably not a good thing to have a lot of fruit in a cluster. We'd rather have single fruit, but fewer fruit, you know, less competition, you get bigger fruit. But a lot of times we're going to see at least a couple, maybe 3, 4 fruit in a cluster. And they can weigh up to a pound on that cluster. So, as I said, kind of banana, mango, pineapple flavor. Some of them have kind of a melon aftertaste also. That's probably overlace would be a good example of that one. And so, as I said, just like name varieties of apples, we have name varieties, right, of pawpaws. We'll talk about that. Kind of a soft custard flesh and very nutritious. So, basically the life cycle of the pawpaw is it flowers in fairly early spring. When I went to Kentucky State University to work with pawpaw 27 years ago, it would flower about April 20th, 25th, somewhere in there. And then we would get frost and it would kill a bunch of the flowers, right? So now we're warmer. And so we actually flower the first week of April. And then we still get the killing frost on April 25th. But, you know, but anyways, we do see earlier flowering. That's kind of the time period. But then they will have a kind of a peak of flowering. But then you'll still have some flowers on the same tree, maybe even in May, right? So it's kind of a long, protracted flowering. And then because of that, you're going to have a longer, protracted harvest season, right? They're going to ripen at different times too. So you should plant at least 2 pawpaws. That's going to make everybody selling trees out here happy, right? You should plant at least 2 because they do need to cross-pollinate, and that way you'll get better fruit set. And I actually had a graduate student who kind of tried to identify whether these, what are the insect pollinators, right? You can see above, maybe not too well, but there's a lady beetle up there with a bunch of pollen on it, and there are flies. He actually put little cages out with adhesive on them, captured all these insects. All kinds of insects visit pawpaw flowers in the spring. So it's probably flies, lady beetles. We found ants, and he's going to be one of the first to report ants too. So a lot of insects probably involved in that pollination in the spring. So once again, pawpaws are great to eat. You know, we're working on pawpaw at Kentucky State because we want to develop new crops for small farmers, right? So we're trying to find those new niches, kind of post-tobacco yet. You know, we're trying to find those. But ornamental crops, really, it's a great ornamental for your home, right? You've got nice fall color, that pyramidal shape in full sun, and see that butterfly? Have you guys seen that butterfly flying around? That's a zebra swallowtail butterfly. Its caterpillar only eats pawpaw leaves. So if you see one of those butterflies, there's got to be pawpaw around, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be able to survive. So the native range of pawpaw, you can see that Ohio and Kentucky are right kind of in the middle of the native range of pawpaw. It's throughout the southeast. That's that purple kind of, or the green on the left, or the purple on the right. And then the other little diagram up here kind of shows you where people are planting pawpaws all across the United States, right? Any zone 5 area or warmer, except for the really warm areas in the kind of Florida area, they do need to have some chilling. And they need about 700 hours or 800 hours of chilling, and then they can break their flower and produce fruit. So if you don't have that much chilling, they may basically shut down and then never come back, right? That's kind of the problem with that. They need some chilling. But you're seeing people plant all across the United States, all across the world, and that's why we're really happy to have many international visitors and talks about pawpaw being grown in Croatia, France, all over the places where there's some chilling, and they do very well in those areas. Now, just a little more about the history of pawpaw. You know, basically, if you go back, De Soto actually reported eating pawpaws or seeing Native Americans eat pawpaws around the Mississippi Valley. Lewis and Clark and their trip back from Oregon were running out of food, and so they were eating pawpaws to stretch their rations, and so they wrote that in their journal. You know, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Daniel Boone, Mark Twain were all purported pawpaw fans. We can't really ask if that's true or not now, but they were purported. And it's a little more. I'm going to read this. So this is a one of those historical markers in Kentucky, right? And that you see in a lot of states. And it says here, this episode is a result of August 1882 Election Day fight. Tolbert, a son of Randolph McCoy, exchanged heated words with Ellison Hatfield, which started a fight. Tolbert Farmer and Randolph McCoy Jr. stabbed Ellison to death. Later, the three brothers were captured by the Hatfield clan, tied to pawpaw trees, and shot in retaliation. So even pawpaw was there for the Hatfield McCoy feud that started. So it's all over in history. Now, pawpaw, you know, you might ask, well, why don't we have pawpaws in grocery stores right now, right? And so, you know, there basically was a contest years ago, it was 1915, where there was a contest by the American Genetics Association. They wanted the best pawpaw. And I think we might, I don't know if Rodney's talking, there was a story about the Ketter pawpaw that came out of that contest. But anyways, that they said basically at the end of that contest that just, you know, intelligent breeding would lead to, you know, new pawpaws very soon, but it just didn't happen. And that's because it is a very perishable fruit, right? It needs refrigeration. There wasn't much refrigeration around 1915. So other crops like the native blueberry, which doesn't need refrigeration, kind of caught on, and pawpaw stayed back. But there were people basically in the Kentucky nut growers and North American fruit explorers that kind of kept selecting the fruit. And then, of course, Neil Peterson, who is not here this time, but he started the Pawpaw Foundation and started his breeding efforts. And of course, I'll show you some of his really good pawpaws in a little bit. He kind of brought up a lot of interest in pawpaw. And then at K-State, we actually started a program around 1990. I came on board, I'll show you in a second, a little after that in 1998. But then this Pawpaw Festival started in 1999. And we were here, I was here for the first Pawpaw Festival. It was down kind of at the fairgrounds down here. I remember driving in, it was driving rain. There was water standing everywhere. And we went and found Chris kind of huddled under a tarp, looking pretty wet. You know, it was not a great auspicious start. And look how much it's grown out. It's an amazing event. And moving down to Lake Snow Park has been a great idea. So, but really caught on. Then we had the North American Pawpaw growers start in 2000. So as I said, at K-State, we started in 1990. Brett Calloway initially started the program by taking the winners of the best plates of pawpaw at the Kentucky State Fair, right? Taking those seeds out of the fruit and then planting them out in the first orchard at K-State. That's how things got started there. And so then Desmond Lane was there for a short time and propagated more pawpaws, and I came in 1998. And so we also became a USDA National Clonal Germplasm Repository, which means we collect pawpaws from around the world and try and grow them out there. And then we use it in our breeding efforts. So we've got a lot of different pawpaws out in those fields. But that's been what we've been doing. I've been there since 1998, and it's been a lot of fun trying to find out, you know, some of the things, just how to grow pawpaw. How should we grow them in orchards? You know, and breeding for better pawpaws. We've done a lot of different things, because not a lot was known about pawpaw and still is not. So how many of you have seen a pawpaw patch right out in the woods, right? Probably most of you. And this is a really thick patch, right? It's at Cove Spring Park in Frankfort. Many stems, right? Many stems. And a lot of times, Sherry Crabtree does extension with me and Jeremy Lowe, we get questions, you know, I've got this pawpaw patch and I never see any fruit in it, right? And there's all these trees. Well, several reasons for that usually. One is it's an understory tree in nature, right? So it's underneath all these big tall trees, doesn't get a lot of sunlight, so it doesn't get a lot of energy, light energy, to produce fruit in that native setting. Also, it needs to have crossing with other pawpaws, genetically different pawpaws, so it's self-compatible. So if you don't have a genetically different pawpaw nearby, right, you're not going to get cross-pollination. And even though you've got all these stems, they can all be genetically identical because they're root suckers, and they're all genetically identical, right? So if you don't have enough diversity of different genotypes in there, you're not going to get cross-pollination. And there's lack of pollinators, and that's another reason. If you got an isolated patch out there, flies and, you know, as I said, beetles are the main pollinators. If you don't get enough flies out there, you're not going to have a lot of good pollination. So, you know, being a scientist, we used to talk about, you know, people putting roadkill, right, in your patches out there. Being a scientist, you know, and we do factorial experiments, I always thought maybe it'd be good to do, you know, raccoon, possum, and then we do both, right, raccoon and possum, and see what the fruits are. No, but anyways, but you can do a number of different things, whether it be, I guess, seaweed emulsion. You can use, I've heard cans of cat food, which I think is kind of interesting and not a bad idea, just so you know that you're feeding the raccoons too, right? But it's something that brings in the flies, pieces of chicken, once again feeding the animals too, but you would bring in then more flies to that patch and get better fruit sets. So if you don't see a lot of fruit in your patch, those are some things you can do. And I will say, well, I'll show you the next slide. Some things you can do, well, this is about the contest. Some things you can do about the patches, you can thin them out up above, right? Try and get more sunlight and get more fertilization. So as I said, basically, you know, we had all these pawpaws out in the wild, but it just didn't catch on. And basically with this contest, you know, a lot of excitement, but then it kind of died down. So basically, and here's the patch one. So you can thin out that patch and make them about 8 feet apart. So you can basically select the strongest stems in your patch. You can prune out, and if you're willing to cut some of the overhanging trees, right, you can do that. And then basically you can fertilize a little bit. You can add some additional seedlings, right? So you can put some additional seedlings to give it some more genetics so that it can cross-pollinate. Or you can go in and graft some of those wild trees. And that's the other thing is that I think the pile of fruit up here disappeared, but sometimes these wild patches are not the best genetics and they're very small fruit, right? So what you can do is just rework those stems with budwood from a good variety that people have selected. Those trees will grow up on that rootstock, and then you'll have really good fruit in that patch. You can do some of that too to kind of improve the fruit size and the yield that you're going to get. So basically, I was going to show this. If you would like to plant some pawpaws, and you could do this either as a homeowner but as a small farmer too, you want to have a good site, and you don't want to plant down in a holler, right? You don't want to plant down in a valley because you're going to get spring frost. Now they tend to like to live along stream beds, right? Because they like water. But if you plant down in the stream bed, in the spring when you have frost, cold air goes down hillsides, right? And the difference between 26 and 28 is having a crop or not, right? Because if it gets down to 28, usually the flowers can still survive. They don't freeze. They can super cool down a little bit. But if they get down under 28 in that lower area because cold air falls, then you'll freeze out all your flowers and have no crop. And that's probably why you see a lot of these clonal, right, patches in those areas too, because they're spreading more by clonal reproduction than they are by cross-pollination and fruit. So that's something to think about. If you've got a hillside, I would put them on the hillside or a little further up. A deep, fertile, well-drained soil. Now I kind of laugh about that because in Franklin County, Kentucky, there is no deep soil, right? There's 2 feet and then a limestone floater. That's kind of what we have in a lot of places across the southeast. But if you can try and get the deepest soil you can, and even if you've got a limestone floater, that they have a strong taproot and it will find its way around the floaters and keep going down. So you can still plant on that. It's just that the thinner the soil, the less reservoir of water and nutrients you have. And so you're going to end up maybe watering more if you've got a thin soil, right, than if it's a deeper soil. So definitely weed control. Can't emphasize this enough. If you don't control even grass around the trees, it really reduces the growth of a pawpaw tree. It's amazing how much grass will absorb nutrients and keep the tree from growing to its full potential. And so this is actually my backyard. You can use wood chip mulch like this. That works pretty well. You can also use some of the landscape fabric. I would probably not use this small disc like this. It doesn't go far enough out. I would probably go out another couple of feet, or a landscape roll, right, and put it in the middle. That works really well, because then you're controlling the grass around it, and you're gonna not have that competition and get a lot more growth. The first year when you put them in, you think they're gonna die probably, but they look bad, and then the second year they look better, the third year they're growing like mad, so you have to be patient too as they establish. Irrigation's real important too. You really need to water that tree the first year, especially in the second year as the root system establishes. So maybe that's the equivalent of about 1 inch of rain per week. And you can do a soil test, kind of see where you are if you need to amend the soil. So if you're establishing the orchard, we usually say full sun, right? As long as that tree is 1.5 feet tall, when you plant it, you don't have to shade it. It might benefit from a tree shelter, right, one of those tubes that you put on, or a little shading, but you don't have to. And it's only if they're smaller than that they're really sensitive to full sun. If you plant something out that's only about 6-8 inches high, if you don't shade it, it's probably going to die, right? But if it is in full sun, it's going to have more energy and it's going to produce more fruit, and you're going to be a lot happier at the end result. Usually about 8 to 10 feet between trees, and maybe about 18 to 20 feet between rows. Or you can do like my graduate student did. They measured across to put in the rows in a certain orchard, and one of them is 15 and the other is about 14, the other's about 22. They had a little trouble with the ruler that year. So anyway, although I admit the one that's 22 is kind of handy because it's a bigger road and it's kind of toward the middle, we can drive down it really easily. But anyways, but try and make sure you're careful and space them out appropriately. If you do that kind of spacing, that's about 295 trees per acre, so it's quite a few trees, and that will give you. Now I do put in here spring planting is probably best, but we've been able to really be pretty successful with fall planting now, and so I think as long as you're putting in probably at the end of October, early November, and basically watering it, I think fall planting is okay. The big thing is not to take a tree out of a greenhouse and then plant it in the middle of November in the field, right? It's not going to have time to acclimate. It's going to die, probably, right? And we've actually had that happen with some folks. So once you get that tree established, as I said, the first year it just kind of hangs on, grows some roots. Second year it's growing more of a taproot. Third year it really gets more top growth. And as you're trying to manage that tree, you want to do training. Now training and pruning are two different things. Training is trying to get that initial tree to kind of have an architecture that's good for the tree. And so a lot of times we talk about central leader pruning. That's something we do with apples too, but basically you want to have that stem go up, you want to have that leader go up, and then you want to make sure you've got really strong arching, basically right angle branching, right, coming out of the trunk. And those are much stronger branches. And if you've grown pawpaw already, you know how wind can damage trees, right? If you've got kind of thinner branches, the wind comes along, you lose your best clusters in a windstorm, right? So if you do build out those stronger branches at right angles, you're not going to get as much wind damage. It's probably worth, you might delay some of the fruit production by a year, but it's worth it, right? It's really worth it in the long run. So, basically, central leader training, you can do some weights even to kind of weigh some of those limbs down is not a bad idea. With stronger trees, easier to pick. Sunburn has not been a problem. We worried about that. If we're going to get too much light penetration into the tree, not a problem. And basically going to be less labor down the line. Now, pruning is what you do maybe at about year 10, maybe a little earlier. We will maybe at year 6 or 7 start taking out the strongest leader. So it's that very top apically dominant stem above, and we'll take that out because I don't want a tree dropping fruit from 30 feet onto my head. It's already happened. You can see the damage, right? So you're better off to cut it now, and then that you can leave a leader yet going up, but it's never going to be as strong a leader, right, as the initial leader. And then they'll spread out into your alleyways. So it's a much better approach. You don't want them to get real tall, just really hard to harvest anyway. Now also, you want to prune back the older trees. So once they get to about 10 years, they start slowing down a little bit. And so if you prune back maybe 25%, maybe even a little less, but 25% of the tree, kind of cut back some of the bigger branches back at the top, so that they break like that, you'll kind of spur growth, right? You'll increase the amount of growth in that tree, and it will live longer. Because we've got some trees, for those who were at the Pawpaw conference at K-State, we've got an over 20-year-old orchard. It looks pretty good yet, it looks pretty good, and that's because we do prune it like that. And Neil Peterson, when he had orchard at the Y, at about 20 years, he started having like maybe 1 or 2% of the trees die every year. But the ones that he did that pruning to live longer. So, and you will get more fruiting surface because the last year's wood is next year's flower buds, right? So you want to kind of increase that amount of growth during the year and get those flower buds too. So that's pruning. So it is really important to build the architecture and then prune it as they get older. Sometimes you're going to see nutrient deficiencies. Now, sometimes you'll see a yellowing of a leaf around a pawpaw cluster. You probably, folks have seen that out here at your own home trees. I wouldn't worry about that a lot because basically there is like magnesium, other things that are translocated back to the fruit from the leaves. So the fruit are kind of cannibalizing the leaves a little bit. And so it's not really showing that there's a deficiency. But if you see this earlier in the year, then you do have a deficiency. And but nitrogen is important to use. Basically, you check that tone here. You want to make sure that you're providing maybe an ounce or two at the beginning. If you're not organic, you can use 10-10-10. We use urea because it's cheap. If you want to go organic, some of the feather meal or blood meal are pretty good. Like Nature Safe is a good OMRI approved product for growing. You can use that. But you do need to provide a little nitrogen, and then maybe 4 to 5 ounces when you get to that 10-year-old tree. We do think that water-soluble fertilizer will help a tree establish, especially the first few years. And that's like Peter's 20-20-20 with micronutrients. I would consider using that, and I've done that in my little orchard at home too. And I think they really benefit from that soluble fertilizer. Usually you would do that once a month, probably in May, June, and July. And you don't want to fertilize after July because you want them to start shutting down a little bit, right? You want them to get ready for winter. So we kind of found out about this the hard way because in some of our older orchards we started seeing a lot of dieback and damage on the trunks. And this is called southwest injury or sun scald. And on the trees, you'll get this kind of southwest, you'll get the sun warming up the southwest side of a pawpaw tree in the wintertime. So, maybe warming it really quite warm, and it's going to lose its hardiness in that bark tissue, and then it gets down to 10 above, right? And that's no longer hardy tissue, so the trunk tissue dies right there, girdles the tree back, and so you can have a tree that really declines quickly if you get that damage. And so basically anything that's over about 1.5 inches in diameter, we start painting now, so that we don't get this southwest injury, because we lost a bunch of trees that way. But what you can do is take latex paint and thin it, either 50 or 3 parts latex paint, 1 part water, and you can paint this, just spray it onto those trees. Some people put a little bit of lime in too, which is probably fine. We used to say always interior latex paint. Don't use oil base, but I think even some of the exterior you can use. There's some zinc in that. But anyways, if you want to err on the side of caution, use the interior white latex paint. Well worth doing, especially in Kentucky, other places here in the sun, and where we get a little colder, like Ohio, and we'll get that warming sun though and deharden the trees. So well worth your time.
Kirk, you have a pointer.
Oh,
if you want to use it, but it's up to you. Yeah, that one of the buttons.
I'll try not to blind anybody. I'm bad with pointers.
There we go. Just in case.
Yeah. So basically, you've probably noticed this. If you have a orchard for a while, all of a sudden this is going to start appearing. And this is called Phylosticta. There's a black spot too, which looks kind of similar, but it's not the same thing. But this is Phylosticta, and basically you'll have these little areas that develop on the leaves, and then they'll get necrotic and they'll fall out. And then, unfortunately, you'll get these black splotches on the fruit. Now, this is especially bad when you've got a wet spring and the fungi kind of moves onto the fruit. And we've tried to do well, the big thing is if you leave it go, and you probably are going to have to live with some of this, is that you've got this kind of cracking. So basically the fungus does not go into the fruit, but it kills the epidermis. Then you get some rain, it can't expand anymore, and you get cracking of the fruit. So you lose a lot of fruit this way. Some fruit crack anyway, right? But it's going to be a lot worse when you get Phylosticta. We tried, I had 3 graduate students do different things. We tried copper, we tried sulfur, we tried some different mixes. None of it was great. You know, it worked really well on the leaves. It kept the leaves from getting the Phylosticta, but it didn't stop it on the fruit. And so the best thing I can say right now is when at the end of the year, pick up your old fruit that falls, right? And you probably need it for seed or something anyway. And just try and have good orchard maintenance, and you won't have as much inoculum for the next year. Otherwise, you can go in maybe with some sulfur and copper sprays and try and reduce it on the leaves. Maybe that'll help your fruit, but it may not. So, but it can be a real problem. The biggest thing is, too, certain varieties are more susceptible to Phylosticta, and NC1 is one of those. I'm not saying don't plant it, but in some years you're going to have more damage because of that. And these are a couple of other kind of pests that we've seen. The Asimina webworm, we just saw that maybe a couple times at our KSU orchards. And then this one is a tricky one, this Telponia, the pedicle borer, and you'll see that in the springtime in a lot of pawpaws. Pawpaws have a lot of flowers, right? They'll have hundreds of flowers on the tree, and maybe only 10% of them ever set as fruit, right? And you will see a bunch of these flowers kind of wither and die, and that's because this insect goes in and lays its egg, and that eats inside the little peduncle and the flower dies. And so you don't usually lose enough flowers because you've already got so many flowers to basically inhibit the crop, but you will see that sometimes. And the 1 year we saw this, and this is called frass, right, which, you know, is insect poop, I'm just going to say it that way. And basically we did see that this same larva was going in and eating some of the fruit. And 1 year it was really bad. It was like 1 or 2% of the fruit had this as a problem, but then we haven't really seen it since. I know Ron Paul also saw them going in and eating into the stem of some of his trees. So I do think it's something to watch for, but I don't worry about it too much. But you be aware that you might see it. There's also kind of a sphinx moth that you can see out there. And Japanese beetle, now I must say, you know, Japanese beetle wave came through when I first got here in 27 years ago. I hardly ever see them now. They kind of have lost their oomph, right? They're native, apparently either fungus or other things that are attacking the adults and it's producing it. So, but you can get localized infestations of Japanese beetles yet that can do a lot of damage. But if you really want to, you know, there's 2 things you can do with Japanese beetles. You can put grapes out and then they're all going to go to the grapes, right? Or you can get some of these Japanese beetle traps. And you can put that trap at your neighbor's house, right? And all of them are going to go there. And then, of course, this is my big problem in my house. Oh, sorry. Now I'm going to do this.
That's me. I'm trying to turn your volume. We have so many people outside.
Okay, I'll try not turn my head. I'll just do like this. But basically, you're going to lose some fruit. You know, when we first had we have 12 acres of pawpaws at the KSU orchards, and I thought we were going to have every like raccoon and possum from every county around us come to our orchard. But, you know, usually we just have several there that are really fat, right? You know, and I actually put, you know, trail cameras out there, and one time there was like this giant possum that came up. It's like Jeremy and I kind of like, oh my God, you know, what is that thing? It's this giant possum eating fruit out there all the time. But, you know, basically it's not too bad there. Now at my house, that's another thing, because I've got about 30 trees at my house. I actually bought the chicken fencing, electric fencing this year, because last year I basically went out there and all the fruit's gone, and I kind of looked over at my neighbor's house. It's like, well, was it? No, but they will come and rob your trees, and so definitely something you're going to have to probably look at if you've got a lot of trees and you've got high raccoon pressure and possums. Electric fencing is probably a good idea. But otherwise, yes, your trash panda will visit, right? So if you want to grow some of your own pawpaws, and this is the thing, well, how do you establish your orchard? And of course, the nursery industry right now is short of pawpaws, right? They sell out very quickly, and you're paying a fair amount for those trees. You can try and produce some of your own seedlings. You can take the seed out of the fruit, you can wash it, and you can put it in moist peat moss, and then put it in the back of your refrigerator until, like, my wife wants to throw it out. But no, but you leave it back there for about 3 months, pull it out in the spring, and then you can plant those seeds, because they need a period of chilling for about 3 months to really maximize germination. They don't need scarification. That's when you cut into them. They don't need that. They just need chilling. Now, don't let them dry out, although I've had people say, Kirk, I did exactly what you said not to do. I dried the seed, I planted them, they still germinated. I think they were lucky, right? But it's a high water content seed. It really should not dry out before you put it in with the moist peat moss to go into chilling. And whatever you do, don't mix it up and put it in the freezer, because even like a day or two and your freezer will kill the seed, because it's a high water content seed and the embryo will be killed, right? So you basically want to use a tall container. It has a strong taproot, and so we often use these that are this tall one pot, because that allows a really good taproot, and they self-prune at the bottom because they're open at the bottom, so the air will self-prune the taproot. If you use a shorter pot, the taproot will wind, and that's not a good thing then when you plant it out. Yeah, maybe about 7 to 8 years to actually produce fruit, though. So that's the problem, of course, with oops, I'm using the pointer to try and advance. There we go. So then you can plant those out. Now I will say, once you plant your seedlings out, and you can also buy seedlings. I can't remember if I left it in this presentation or not. Some divisions of forestry at different states will also sell trees, and the Kentucky Division of Forestry actually carried pawpaw trees last year. They sold 32,000 seedlings, and I think it was kind of an odd pricing. It was like 10 for 40, 25 for 60, and 100 for $100. 32,000 seedlings. And this year they started sales already for next spring, and they sold out in 3 days. And I think they only had like 6,000-7,000 this year to sell. So, but there are some divisions of forestry, like Indiana I know has them. I don't know about Ohio, but you can check on that. It's a great way to get cheaper seedlings that you can then plant, grow up, and then graft onto. So basically, we've been cloning in horticulture a long time, and that's basically taking tissue from a tree that we like and putting it onto a rootstock and letting that bud grow out, becoming the tree. Because otherwise, right now, like, if you've got the original tree of Atwood or something, you can try stem cuttings. They don't work. I can guarantee you that. In fact, Sherry tried 5,000 cuttings and one rooted. Okay, so that does not work. Root cuttings, we've tried that, and you get a little bit of growth out of the root cutting, and then they usually die because they don't want to produce roots. Layering also does not work. I've tried it. Tissue culture, we can easily get shoots in tissue culture, and then we can't root them. And it's been very frustrating. I had 2 postdocs that worked on this. They couldn't make it work. I heard there was a nursery in Europe that was saying, oh yes, we can root pawpaw nut, and I'd not seen the plants done in 10 years. So my guess is it was like at a root, like a 10% rate. It's not economically viable or something. But basically, yeah, the only thing we can do is grafting and budding. And the great thing about grafting and budding is you've got, right, the mature part down here is the rootstock, or this rootstock, and then you've got mature tissue from the tree of interest up here. Otherwise, in a seedling, it has to go through a period of juvenility, right, before it'll flower. And in this case, you're already putting that mature tissue onto the rootstock, and after it grows out a year, it'll produce flower buds and fruit. So usually in 3 years or 4 years, you can have fruit on a grafted tree, where a seedling tree you might wait 5 or 7 years to get through that period of juvenility. So you can either use bud or grafting. Budding is when you take a little chip and you'll put it in and let this bud grow out, and then you'll cut the top off and just let that bud become the tree. And then there's other things you can do, like whip and tongue or grafting. This is like a grafting device, which I didn't bring with me, but you can buy these pretty cheaply, at least some of the knockoffs on Amazon, and they will cut out a piece, and then you'll cut out the other piece of sign, put them together, and they fit together like a puzzle. They work really well. And then there's whip and tongue, where you'll cut off a slice of the budwood above and a slice on the rootstock. You'll make a little kind of a slice on each side so that these lock together. Now this works almost 95% of the time, that whip and tongue. It's amazing how bad they can look and still take, right? And I've done some really ugly ones and they still take. So that is probably the best method if you want to go out and top work your seedlings, right? You would let the tree maybe get up to a little bigger than my finger or even my thumb, and depending on your sign wood, then you can still do a whip and tongue. After it gets a little bigger than my thumb, you want to go with a bark inlay graft. That's another story. But basically, budding does work, right? Chip budding, but it's not quite as successful as it used to be, for me anyway, either. You'll get mealybugs behind the chips sometimes. That's a really big problem we've had. So the thing about it is, as I said before, pawpaw seedlings, it's kind of like your children. They're not going to be exactly like you. They're going to be different, right? It's a result of sexual recombination. So you may have really good fruit quality. Like if you go out and take Susquehanna or Shenandoah seed, plant it out, some of them may be as good or a little better, and then a whole bunch of them may be far worse than the original tree, right? So that's why we want to go with grafting for trying to get better fruit quality, unless you just want to experiment. So I'll show you kind of the short list. Actually, I've got pictures now. KSU, Atwood, Benson, Chappelle are really good. And then there's some other kind of traditional ones that are out there, and some of the Peterson ones. Let me show you some photos of those. Oh, actually I was going to show you this too. So you want to plant more than one variety, as I said. They need to cross-pollinate. And so we don't know what combinations are the best combinations. So I would buy 3 different varieties of whatever it's going to be. And that way you'll ensure cross-pollination. And so you can, this is the male part. So they have male and female parts in the same flower. And this is the female stage that happens first. And this may not even be real maroon. But this is the stigmatic surface that kind of glistens. And then this is when the pollen is being shed after this stage. And that's the male stage. You can take a paintbrush, right, and you can paint the pollen onto there, and you can get pretty good fruit set. In fact, I've got an isolated tree in front of the Franklin County Extension Office. I went up there with a bunch of flowers, and I pollinated for 10 minutes, and there were like 30 clusters on that tree last year. I drove by it this year. I didn't get a chance to go out there in the spring for them. No fruit on that tree, right, because it's really isolated. So you can, take the chance. The flowers will be pollinated also by the flies and beetles. I've been experimenting with some other devices. So Tom does have a very long, this is Tom, we have 4 cats. Tom has a very long tail. You can see he likes to get them near the pollen, near the flowers. But the problem is his attention span is very short. So he's constantly trying to go to other trees and pollinate them, not necessarily pawpaws, and run up them. But anyways, I really think that's a pretty good application device if he could just be a little more consistent, as in herding cats, right? But anyways, Tom has since retired to the house. He doesn't get to go out anymore because he likes to run too much. So once again, you want to plant multiple different trees. I would say KSU Atwood is, this is shameless self-promotion at this point. So KSU Atwood, really good, very productive, has a really good mango flavor. It's very commonly available in the nursery industry. And it's got a good size fruit. Some years the fruit is very large on it, but it's consistently good. KSU Benson, really round fruit, very pretty, very productive. Now Atwood was kind of a mid to late season ripening. This one's really early, so this is almost like PA Golden, kind of early. and it's got a really good fruit color and taste. So it's also out there. And then there's KSU Chappelle. Neil Peterson thought this was one of the best tasting pawpaws he's ever tasted. That's high praise from Neil. And it really is an excellent fruit. It's a very large fruit, about 250 grams on average. It's mild. It's kind of a banana, pineapple, mango, and only 5% seed. Now I got to ask you, how many of you tried the Ale81 pawpaw? Okay, just a few, because it's only in like Kentucky and maybe just into Ohio where you can buy it. It's regionally distributed. They took some of the KSU Chappelle home when they came to visit us, and they made it based on that flavor. So they used all natural flavors, but they recreated the flavor in the Ale81 pawpaw. And it's been so popular. It's the most popular seasonal release they've ever done. They sold 1 million bottles. Everything is sold now, except it's still out in some of the stores. I think we saw it in Moorhead at a gas station. I saw somebody buying it. So it's really quite good, but it was a great... Sorry, I'm losing my voice. It's a really great way to introduce people to pawpaw first time. We have to get my water in a second. I've been talking a lot the last few days.
You're good on time. I'm just giving you a heads up while you're taking a break. So, okay, we got a few more slides.
Okay. So these are some of the new releases. This is KSU Dunnigan. Really good flavor. And it's pretty seedy, but it's really tasty. And so that's just our new release that we just made. And then there's this one, which I'm just going to say KSU Choice, because that's the thing is my president said we must name a pawpaw after you. You've been here so long, we must name it after you. I said okay, but I said can we call it Pomper's Choice, right? And that way now I can just say so KSU Choice is pretty good. Right, because I don't want, being a Minnesotan, we're kind of, maybe don't want to see your name so much. So, because I actually told him, usually you have to die to get something named after you, and I don't want to die,
Let's
so.
acknowledge this variety.
So it's a really good one. It's a very large fruit, very mango-y, kind of reminds me of Atwood, but it's a larger fruit, so it's really worth your while. So these are some of the ones that we still kind of recommend. NC1, I'm just going to fly through slides. Overlace, Sunflower. These are all really good ones that you can buy out there. But Potomac, really good Neil Peterson selection. Very large, does crack a little bit. Shenandoah, which is, I think, I really think Neil's, it's a real big accomplishment because it's such a good pawpaw. But it's mild, but it's really good. Wabash is one that he's got too. Does tend to crack a little bit, but it's really good in a dark flesh color. Susquehanna, everybody loves Susquehanna. That's probably his best tasting release. Everybody loves it. It's a little light on yielding, but it's really good. So as I said, you can buy these at quite a few nurseries. I already mentioned you can buy them at Kentucky nurseries. Now I just want to mention harvest real quick, and then we'll go to questions. You can harvest the pawpaw when it starts to ripen and soften, right? And just kind of pull it off the tree easily. And I wish we had a color break where it was yellow consistently and you can harvest it, but we don't have a consistent color break on any of these varieties. So you harvest in August and late August and into September. You can store them in the refrigerator for about 2 weeks. And we've been actually trying to do some other post-harvest work, but it's tough to make it last longer than that. And they do bruise pretty easily. I wish we had a firmer pawpaw. Susquehanna is probably the firmest one we have. It will ship a little better than some others. But if they bruise, they get bruising, they get a little bit of bitterness in that. Sometimes you see this red-pink in a fruit too. We don't really know if that's a bacteria or a fungus that kind of gets in from a wound in the fruit. But if you're processing, throw it out just in case. And sometimes you don't want to leave skin in, and that's the other thing is pawpaw right now, all we can really do is we can either squeeze the pulp out along with the seed or scoop it out. You can use a fry pan thing like that. I have bought so many lingerie bags at Walmart to kind of put, they wonder about me. But you know, you squeeze the pulp out, it leaves the seed behind in there. That works really well. And you can put the pulp in the freezer to last quite a long time. And then we discovered this Roma saucer. And if you kind of cut off the end of the spiral, actually Jerry Lehman brought this to our attention, then the seeds will fit through it. And it's $90 and it's really cheap. You'll get the pulp in a bowl and the seed out. You run it through a couple times. It works really well for mass production of pulp. And then if you really want to get into it, about $5,000 into it, you can buy the RoboCoop and you put in the pulp and the seed and it just really good job. It cleans it up very effectively. And there's a Jeff McCreed distillery down the road from us. They processed 5,000 pounds of pawpaw fruit for their brandy in previous years, and they bought one of these, and that really helped them do that. So, you know, this is Rob's data, so we'll see more. About $10 a pound.
You gonna make it, Kirk?
Yep. I'll leave it on this for a second. Makes a great ice cream. Yeah, and a good jam. That's why everybody can take a picture of. Jams are really good. Well, that's pretty much what I got for you. Any questions? We only got a couple of minutes, probably. Yeah. The fruiting like?
Kirk, can you repeat the questions because they're going to have a hard time hearing outside?
Yeah. Actually, I'll just pass you this one.
What is the fruiting life of a pawpaw tree?
Okay. You know, they're kind of a short-lived tree. It's almost like a peach tree. And so you might only expect 20-some years out of a tree. I would probably start recycling them at 20 years. You can cut them off. You can regraft onto the root suckers then. But they don't live, you know, past 25 years, basically. Their production goes so far down after you replace the tree.
Kirk, we got a question over here. Hold on.
Okay.
What about deer?
So our main problem with deer is that they like to rub their antlers right in the springtime on the trees and girdle them, but they tend not to eat the foliage.
Question over here.
In my part of Ohio, the problem in our understory is that the honeysuckle, Asian honeysuckle, is trying to take over. How does the pawpaw compete with the Asian honeysuckle? Because, boy, it's really taken over our understory in my part of Ohio.
Unfortunately, I had a graduate student who kind of worked on that to see if pawpaw could hold the niche against bush honeysuckle, and it cannot. So ultimately, bush honeysuckle will win, and that hurts me because I got acres of, you know, bush honeysuckle. I hate it, but it's just the way it is. Yep.
I had a question about the pruning. I'm assuming you prune when the tree's dormant, right?
Yeah, usually March.
Okay. And the question I had about my trees is there a point where you can't prune a larger limb that it could risk, like if a crotch is not really that healthy, is it safe to remove it?
Yeah, I mean, if it's starting to look diseased, I would take it anyway. But the key is if you know, there's two management techniques, one for fruit, one for budwood. You can cut them back further, maybe 30-40% for budwood production, but if you do it too far, they're going to die, right? They don't take severe pruning that well. Yeah.
Have you tried using the nets underneath your trees for harvest season?
I tried it many years ago. In fact, you know, I was kind of excited about that. And the problem is that you might come out in a day and it's like 87 like it is going to be today. And you'll even see the outline or the parts of the net in the fruit skin, right? Because it sat there and kind of warmed up. So I wish nets worked, but you've got to really be on it quickly because they're very fragile when they fall off the tree.
I'm located in upstate New York, Zone 5A. Any of these varieties more suited for that?
So, you know, your biggest thing is when you go further north is whether you're going to have enough heat units to ripen up. So, you know, that's why we have like PA Golden and something like Benson would be good for those areas. The ones I probably wouldn't plant are Potomac, and you might not be able to plant Susquehanna. Because kind of likewise in Oregon, we don't get a lot of heat units. I was there for a while. Susquehanna would not ripen up some years because they just didn't get enough heat units. So you're probably going to have to aim towards some of those early ripening ones. Shendo should be okay. Yeah.
Well, last year we had some pawpaws that when you peeled them, they had gray flesh. And it was gray and mushy, and I've never seen that. Do you have...
Haven't really seen it. Probably the best thing to do is throw it away.
Yeah, no,
Right,
but
yeah.
And it's the first time we've seen it, and we found it in maybe 8 or 10 pawpaws.
Okay, it could be some type of fungal organism invading through a break in the skin. I will say, like, this year's a horrible year for us. We had a late frost, so we only got about 40% of the fruit we'd usually get. And then it got really rainy, and they didn't get enough of sunlight to really fully ripen or develop. And then we got drought, and some of them aborted early and drop early, and they don't taste as good. And then I still got fruit on the trees that's waiting, and I'm not sure how well that's going to taste. So having these kind of weird years can affect the fruit quality and how it looks inside too. Yep.
With potted seedlings, how would you store them over winter if you wanted to plant them in the spring?
So, it's kind of like you got to make sure the root system does not freeze. Now, we would go out on a cement back deck we have on the greenhouses at K-State, and we would put them on the ground, so they're in contact with the ground, cover them with straw, and then put a big blue tarp over the top. Most years that worked. Then we had a year minus 20, and we uncovered them, we hoped, and they started to leaf out a little bit, and then they all died because the root system had frozen, right? So the tops are okay, but the roots freeze. So the best thing you can do, of course, is almost bury them, but you got to get them in full contact with the ground and try and keep them as warm as possible from the ground. That's your best hope.
So we are right at time where we need to transition over to the next presentation. Kirk has agreed to spend up to 6 hours standing out here answering your questions. So he's going to walk out that way, and you guys are following him out. Let's give a big round of applause for Kirk Pomper, the CEO of Pawpaws.